Right now, someone is using you. Maybe it's a coworker who keeps taking credit for your ideas. Maybe it's a friend who only calls when they need something. Maybe it's someone in your life who seems to always come out ahead no matter what happens while you're left wondering how they do it. What if I told you the answer was written down over 500 years ago? Niccolo Machiavelli, the man history turned into a villain, didn't write a guide on how to be evil. He wrote a survival manual, a map of human nature so precise that the psychology behind it is still being confirmed by modern researchers today. And buried inside his work are 7 traps, 7 patterns of thinking and behavior that destroy people, careers, and relationships not because someone attacks you but because you walk right into them yourself. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what those traps are, how to recognize them in your own life, and most importantly, how to stay out of them. This isn't about becoming manipulative. It's about becoming unmanipulatable. Let's start. Trap number 1. The trap of believing people are what they say they are. Here's something Machiavelli wrote that made him enemies for centuries. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. Because most of us are raised to take people at their word. We're taught that trust is a virtue. And it is, but trust without discernment isn't a virtue. It's a vulnerability. Now, before you go thinking this is a cynical worldview, let me show you what modern psychology actually says. There's a well-documented phenomenon in behavioral science called the halo effect. It was studied extensively by psychologist Edward Thorndike, and what it shows is genuinely alarming. When someone makes a good first impression on us, when they're charming, attractive, confident, or articulate, we automatically assume they're also honest, competent, and trustworthy. We fill in their character with positive assumptions based on a surface-level signal. Machiavelli saw this happening in Renaissance Florence 500 years before the research existed. And here's where it becomes a trap for you specifically. You've probably met someone, maybe a new boss, a new romantic partner, a new friend who was almost dazzling in how put together they seemed. They said all the right things. They were generous early on. They seemed to genuinely care, and so you extended trust quickly. Maybe you shared something vulnerable. Maybe you gave them access to your time, your resources, your reputation. And then, slowly, the picture started to shift. Most people, when this happens, blame themselves. They say, "I should have seen the signs." And yes, the signs were probably there, but the reason you didn't see them isn't stupidity. It's biology. Your brain was doing exactly what it evolved to do: use social shortcuts to assess people quickly. The problem is, those shortcuts can be exploited. So what does the smart version of this look like? Not paranoia, not assuming everyone is lying. The smart version is what psychologists call behavioral consistency monitoring. Instead of listening to what people say, you watch what they do over time in different situations, especially when it costs them something to do the right thing. Pay attention to how people treat others when there's no benefit in it. Pay attention to what happens when they're frustrated or when they think no one important is watching. Pay attention to whether their actions and their words point in the same direction consistently, not just when they're trying to impress you. Most people evaluate character based on peak moments, the best versions someone showed them early on. Smart people evaluate character based on patterns, what someone does repeatedly under ordinary conditions and minor stress. Machiavelli's insight here is simple but powerful. The person who confuses presentation for character will be deceived. The person who waits for demonstrated behavior to speak louder than polished words, that person is almost impossible to fool. Don't evaluate people based on who they tell you they are. Evaluate them based on what they repeatedly do when it matters. Trap number 2. The trap of neutrality, thinking you can stay out of it. This one is subtle, and it's probably the trap that costs the most people the most in professional settings. Machiavelli was brutally clear about this. He wrote that one of the most dangerous positions you can occupy is neutrality, not picking sides, trying to be liked by everyone. He said a prince who stays neutral when those around him are at war will ultimately be destroyed by the winner, because the winner will trust him with nothing. Now let's bring this into your actual life. You're at work. Two senior leaders are in conflict. Maybe they disagree on strategy. Maybe they're competing for the same promotion. Maybe there's genuine tension that's been building for months. And you think, decide to stay out of it. You're friendly to both. You don't take sides. You think you're being politically savvy. What actually happens? Both sides read your neutrality as either weakness or secret allegiance to the other camp. The person who eventually wins, or whoever has more influence in the short term, looks back at who was with them. You weren't, not because you were against them, but because you were nowhere. Here's what modern organizational psychology calls this. Fence-sitting has a social cost that people dramatically underestimate. A 2016 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people who refuse to take positions in interpersonal conflicts are rated less trustworthy, not more, by both parties involved. Your attempt at safety makes you seem untrustworthy to everyone. Now, and this is critical, Machiavelli wasn't saying pick the powerful side blindly, or be a sycophant, or abandon your values for political survival. That's the oversimplification that turned his name into an insult. What he was saying is this: know what you stand for, and let people know it. Authentic conviction, even when it's inconvenient, earns you something that calculated neutrality never will: respect. Think about the people in your life who you genuinely trust and admire. Are they people who give you wishy-washy non-answers to avoid conflict? Or are they people who tell you the truth even when it's uncomfortable, who have a clear sense of what they believe and act accordingly? Most people stay neutral because they're afraid of the cost of taking a position. Smart people understand that the cost of not having a position is higher. It's just paid out slowly, invisibly, over time. The fix for Trap 2 isn't aggression. It's clarity. Know your values. Be willing to say, here's where I stand and why. You don't have to be combative, but you do have to be present. The person who has earned a reputation for honest, principled positions, even controversial ones, is far more valuable and far more protected than the person who is carefully cultivated a reputation for agreeing with everyone. Neutrality feels safe, but it's actually one of the most exposed positions you can be in. Trap number 3. The trap of relying on the goodwill of others. This one might sting a little, but stay with me, because the insight here is genuinely liberating. Machiavelli wrote, "It is much safer to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." That quote gets taken out of context constantly. People read it and think he was advising cruelty or intimidation. That's not what it means in practice. What he was actually pointing at is this: goodwill is the most fragile kind of social currency. It fluctuates with mood, with circumstance, with how recently you did someone a favor. If the foundation of your position in a relationship, in a career, in a community rests entirely on other people liking you, you are always one bad day away from losing everything. Modern psychology backs this up in a really interesting way. There's a concept called contingent self-esteem. It refers to people whose sense of security comes entirely from others' approval. Research consistently shows that people with high levels of contingent self-esteem experience more anxiety, make worse decisions under social pressure, and are significantly more susceptible to manipulation. Why? Because someone who desperately needs your approval will do almost anything to get it back once you withdraw it. And here's the trap. Most people aren't even aware this is happening to them. Think about whether any of these sound familiar. You agree with opinions you don't actually hold because you don't want to create tension. You take on more work than you can handle because you don't want to disappoint people. You stay in relationships, romantic, professional, social, that aren't good for you because the thought of someone being upset with you feels unbearable. You let people take credit for your work because confronting them feels worse than the injustice. If you recognized yourself in any of that, and most people will, you've encountered this trap. Now, what did Machiavelli mean by the alternative? He wasn't talking about making people afraid of you through cruelty. In the full context of his writing, what he meant was, build a position that doesn't depend on emotional approval. Have genuine competence. Have leverage. Have options. Have standards you hold to even when it disappoints people. The modern translation is this: become someone whose value is based on what you do and what you stand for, not on whether people feel warmly toward you in any given moment. This doesn't mean being cold or uncaring. It means being secure. It means your self-worth and your position aren't held hostage to the shifting approval of others. Most people shape themselves around what others seem to want from them. Smart people shape themselves around their own values and let others respond to that. People who have this, and you've met them, have a kind of quiet gravity. They're respected without trying to be liked. They're listened to because they have something real to say, not because they're performing for an audience. How do you build this? By developing real skills. By following through on your commitments consistently so your word means something. By being willing to say no when you mean no, and to hold boundaries even when it creates temporary discomfort. By making decisions based on your values rather than based on what will make people like you most in the next 5 minutes. Likability is a nice bonus. It's not a foundation. Build something more durable underneath you. Trap number 4. The trap of waiting for the perfect moment. Machiavelli spent a lot of time writing about something he called fortuna, fortune, luck, the uncontrollable forces of the woe. Rilled, and what he said about it was this: fortune is like a violent river. When things are calm, men can take precautions. But when the flood comes, fortune sweeps everything away. The only protection is to have built levees and channels in advance, not to wait for the flood to plan your response. What does that mean in practical modern terms? It means this: most people operate on a response model. Something goes wrong and then they figure out what to do. The trap is in thinking that waiting to react is the same as being careful. It isn't. It's actually one of the most dangerous stances you can take. Let me give you a scenario that you might find uncomfortably familiar. You've known for a while that something in your life isn't working. Maybe it's a job that doesn't fit. Maybe it's a relationship dynamic that's unhealthy. Maybe it's a financial situation that needs to change. And every time you think about addressing it, something in you says, not yet. The timing isn't right. Things might improve on their own. I'll deal with it when it becomes a real problem. And then, one day it becomes a real problem. And now you're not choosing when to act. The crisis is choosing for you. The options you had when things were stable have narrowed dramatically. The emotional bandwidth you would have brought to a proactive decision is now completely consumed by damage control. Behavioral economists have studied this extensively under the label of present bias, our cognitive tendency to overweight immediate comfort versus future outcomes. We dramatically undervalue action taken now versus action forced upon us later by crisis. The problem is that action taken in crisis is always more expensive, more stressful, and less effective than action taken in preparation. Machiavelli understood this intuitively. He watched princes and republics fall, not because they were ambushed by something unforeseeable, but because they saw the signs, felt the discomfort of acting, and chose the temporary relief of delay. And then, when the crisis hit, and it always hit, they had nothing prepared. Most people wait until the situation forces their hand, and then they're shocked by how few options they have. Smart people read slow-moving problems as fast-moving ones disguised by comfortable delay, and they act before the urgency becomes undeniable. Here's the smart version. It's not about being paranoid or manufacturing urgency where there is none. It's about what psychologists call Proactive coping. Proactive copers don't wait for problems to force their hand. They scan their environment, identify the slow-moving issues before they become fast-moving crises, and take small, manageable actions now that prevent catastrophic forced actions later. What are the things in your life right now that you already know need to be addressed? The conversations you've been avoiding, the skills you've been meaning to build, the relationship patterns that haven't been working, the financial preparations you've been putting off. You already know what they are. You can probably feel them right now, somewhere in the back of your mind, patiently waiting. Machiavelli's message isn't to live in fear. It's to respect time, because time spent in preparation is time you own. Time spent in crisis is time that owns you. Start now. The perfect moment isn't coming, and the people who are waiting for it are the ones who walk straight into this trap. Trap number 5. The trap of being too honest, too early, with the wrong people. Now I have to be very careful about how I frame this, because it could easily be misread. This is not an argument for dishonesty. Stay with me, because the distinction matters. Machiavelli observed that people who make a rigid public commitment to absolute, unconditional transparency often pay a severe price for it, not because honesty is bad, but because they fail to understand that not everyone they encounter is operating with good faith. And sharing your inner world with someone who isn't operating in good faith isn't virtue. It's just expensive. Here's what I mean. Modern psychology has a concept called information asymmetry in social exchanges. When you share something vulnerable, something personal, something strategic about yourself, your fears, your plans, your uncertainties, your ambitions, you are extending trust. And when that trust is met with equal openness, something real and valuable is built. But when that trust is extended to someone who will weaponize it, the damage can be significant and lasting. Think about how many times you've seen this happen. Someone new at a company, eager to build relationships, shares their honest opinion about the wrong thing to the wrong person in the wrong setting, and finds that opinion quoted back to them in a meeting, out of context by someone who used it to undermine them. Or someone who in the early stages of a relationship, professional or personal, shares too much too soon and watches the dynamic shift as the other person pulls away, or worse, files it away to use later. This is trap 5. Not honesty itself, but indiscriminate honesty, honesty extended without first establishing whether the context and the person are worthy of it. What does Machiavelli say about this? He talks about the danger of revealing your intentions, your fears, and your weaknesses to people who haven't demonstrated they deserve that access. Not because everyone is an enemy, but because information shared publicly is information that can no longer be controlled. The psychology research on this is really interesting. Studies on social disclosure and trust find a strong pattern. The depth of information shared should be roughly calibrated to the depth of demonstrated trust. Premature deep disclosure, sharing too much too soon doesn't accelerate intimacy the way people hope. It actually creates discomfort in the other person and vulnerability in you. What you meant as an act of openness gets read as a red flag. And what you hoped would build connection ends up creating distance or creating a target. Most people share their full inner world indiscriminately, hoping openness will be rewarded. Smart people offer access in proportion to what's been earned, and they protect their inner world not out of fear, but out of respect for its value. Here's the practical takeaway. Be honest. Be authentic. But be those things proportionally meaning. Extend the full depth of your honesty as trust is demonstrated over time through behavior, not through someone simply being present and seemingly friendly. There are people in your life who have earned a window into your real thinking. Share with them freely. There are contexts, competitive professional settings, early relationship stages, large groups where full transparency is an offering without a recipient. Be present, be genuine, But understand that discretion isn't deception, it's wisdom. Machiavelli wasn't saying be a liar. He was saying be a steward of your own inner world. Not everything you think needs to be said. Not everyone who seems friendly has the intent or the character to be trusted with what you share. Learn to tell the difference. The people worth being truly open with will reveal themselves over time. Let them. Trap number 6. The trap of appearing strong when you're actually weak, and the equally dangerous trap of appearing weak when you're actually strong. This one is probably the most psychologically rich of all 7, and it operates in 2 directions. Appearing strong when you're weak. Machiavelli was merciless about this. He wrote about leaders who, when their position was weak or threatened, would double down on displays of power, making demands, escalating conflicts, puffing up their public image in the hope that the performance of strength would create the reality of it. It almost never worked. And here's why modern psychology explains it so well. There's a phenomenon called status anxiety, studied at length by social psychologists. When people feel their status or security is threatened, they have a strong impulse to signal dominance, to act as if they have more confidence, more power, more certainty than they actually do. This is an evolutionary legacy. In our ancestral environment, appearing to have status sometimes created status. But in modern social and professional contexts, this backfires in a specific, predictable way. The performance of strength when you're actually weak tends to escalate situations you have no capacity to win. It signals to the people who know how to read it, not strength but fear, and it locks you into positions that are unsustainable. You've made demands or assertions that you can't back up, and now your credibility hangs on a bluff. Think about the person who responds to job insecurity by becoming more controlling and territorial rather than more collaborative. They're not projecting strength. They're projecting the exact kind of fearful overreach that gets people managed out. Or the person in a relationship who responds to feeling vulnerable by becoming more critical and demanding, rather than acknowledging the vulnerability. These are the people who create crises out of discomforts that could have been managed quietly. Most people, when they feel weak, perform strength and make everything worse. Smart people, when they feel weak, stabilize quietly, address the actual source, and wait until they've genuinely built something before signaling it. The smart version is counterintuitive. When you're weak, don't perform strength. Stabilize. Gather your resources quietly. Address the actual source of the weakness without announcing it loudly. Machiavelli admired the people who could read their situation with cold precision and respond to it strategically rather than emotionally. Now, the second direction. Appearing weak when you're actually strong. This one is subtler and more interesting. Machiavelli noticed that some leaders, when they had genuine power, would deliberately downplay it not out of false modesty, but out of a sophisticated understanding that visible power invites coalitions of opposition. When you appear to be a threat, people band together against you. When you appear non-threatening, you move freely. Modern research on social influence actually confirms this. Studies on leadership perception find that people who are visibly successful without being visibly gracious about it activate resentment and competitive aggression in others, whereas people who have significant capability but don't foreground it constantly tend to attract allies and reduce friction. They get more done because they're not spending energy managing the resentment their visibility creates. This is not an argument for false modesty. It's an argument for understanding that how you carry your capability matters as much as whether you have it. The trap in both directions is the same. The gap between how things are and how they're being presented creates instability. Either direction costs you. And the sustainable strategy is calibration, knowing what you actually have, acting from that reality with precision, and not inflating or deflating the picture for effect. Are you performing strength you don't have, escalating, demanding, bluffing when the situation calls for quiet preparation? Or are ye out underplaying genuine capability because you're afraid of the exposure that comes with being visible. Both are traps. Both cost you. The goal is accuracy, not performance. Trap number 7, the most important one. The trap of confusing the game you think you're playing with the game actually being played. This is where Machiavelli goes deepest. And it's where I think most people will find the most useful and most uncomfortable insight. Here's what he observed. Most people operate with a mental model of the world, a set of assumptions about how things work, what others want, and what will lead to success that was formed early and updated rarely. And the danger is that the world keeps changing while the model stays the same. He wrote about people who had been successful under one set of conditions, and then, when conditions changed, kept doing the same things. They thought they were playing the right game. But the game had shifted underneath them, and they hadn't noticed. And because they hadn't noticed, they couldn't adapt. And because they couldn't adapt, they lost not to a smarter enemy but to their own inflexibility. Let me make this very concrete for you. Think about someone who built their entire professional identity around being indispensable through information control. They were the person who knew things other people didn't. That was their power, the closed loop, the exclusive access, the careful management of who knew what. And for a while it worked. Then the information landscape changed. Access democratized. Their exclusive knowledge became Googleable. Their advantage disappeared. But they kept playing the same game, holding information close, being vague, protecting their position through opacity, even as that strategy became not just ineffective but actively harmful to their reputation as a collaborative teammate. They were playing the old game. They lost, not because someone beat them, but because they didn't notice the rules had changed. Or think about a relationship dynamic. Someone who learned early in life that the way to keep people close was through being needed, always being the helper, the rescuer, the one who solved problems. For a while, this felt like love. It felt like connection. But they never developed the capacity to be in a relationship where they didn't have the upper hand through someone else's dependence. And every relationship that tried to shift toward real mutuality, where both people were capable, both people were strong, they unconsciously undermined. Because that version of connection required a different game, and they only knew how to play one. They were playing the old game. And it was costing them every relationship that could have given them what they actually wanted. Most people operate from mental models built years or decades ago and never genuinely updated. Smart people treat their assumptions about how things work as hypotheses to be tested, not truths to be defended. Machiavelli's insight here is that self-awareness about the game being played is not a luxury, it is the foundational skill. Without it, every other skill you develop is being applied to the wrong problem. You can be brilliant, hard-working, well-intentioned, and still fail consistently if the framework you're bringing to your life is out of date. Modern psychology has a really useful framework for this, connected to research on cognitive flexibility and adaptive expertise. The research shows that the most effective people across virtually every domain aren't necessarily the smartest or the most hardworking. They are the most accurate about their current situation. They hold their assumptions loosely. They look for evidence that the rules have changed. They update. What game are you playing? And is it the 1T hats actually in front of you? Take the professional context. Are you still competing on the skills and strategies that worked 5 years ago? Or have you honestly assessed what the current version of success in your field looks like and rebuilt your approach accordingly? Because the landscape has shifted in almost every profession in the last decade, and the people who haven't noticed are the ones quietly confused about why the effort isn't translating to results the way it used to. Take relationships. Are you bringing the tools and defenses you built in past relationships, maybe past difficult relationships, into a present situation where those defenses aren't needed and are causing damage? Are you acting cautiously, testing, withholding, based on lessons learned from people who aren't here anymore, applying old rules to a new game, protecting yourself from threats that no longer exist, while real connection waits on the other side of a wall you built for someone else? Take your own self-concept. Is the story you tell about who you are and what you're capable of based on honest, current evidence? Or is it based on a narrative that formed years ago, maybe decades ago, that you've never truly revisited? The beliefs about your limits, your worth, your place in the world, when did you form them? And have you ever tested them with the rigor they deserve? This is the deepest trap, because it's not external. No one is putting you in it. You walk into it yourself, every day, by failing to question the map you're using to navigate the territory. How do you escape it? It starts with one practice: regular, honest self-assessment. Not the self-assessment that confirms what you already believe about yourself. Real assessment, the kind that asks, what is actually working? What isn't? What assumptions am I operating on that I've never tested? Where are my results not matching my expectations? And what does that mismatch tell me about the accuracy of my model, not the unfairness of the world? And crucially, who in your life gives you honest feedback rather than comfortable agreement? Because the people who are most useful to us are rarely the ones who validate everything we do. They're the ones who are willing to show us where the map and the territory don't match. Machiavelli's world was brutal and fast-moving. Survival required being more honest about reality than reality was comfortable to look at. Your world is different in its specifics, but the cognitive requirement is the same. The people who navigate modern complexity successfully are the ones who can see clearly, even when clearly isn't flattering. Let me bring all 7 of these together now, because when you see them as a system, something important emerges. The first trap, believing people are what they say, is about reading others accurately. The second, false neutrality, is about knowing and owning your own position. The third, over-relying on goodwill, is about building real security that doesn't depend on being liked. The fourth, waiting for the perfect moment, is about your relationship with time and the hidden cost of comfortable delay. The fifth, indiscriminate honesty, is about calibrating trust and disclosure proportionally to what's been earned. The sixth, misrepresenting your strength, is about the gap between reality and presentation, and how that gap always costs you. And the seventh, playing the wrong game, is about the accuracy of your entire framework for how the world works. What ties all of them together is a single thread: the willingness to see things as they are, not as you wish they were, not as you fear they might be, but as they actually are right now in this situation, with these people at this moment in your life. Machiavelli was so hated for so long because he refused to flatter. He looked at human nature, including the uncomfortable corners of it, and he described what he saw with precision. No reassurances, no softening, just an unflinching map. And the people who read his work carefully, not to become manipulators, but to understand the landscape they were operating in, those people had an advantage. Not because they became ruthless, but because they became clear. And clarity, in a world full of people operating on comfortable illusions, is itself a superpower. There's an important ethical dimension here that I don't want to rush past. Everything in this video has been framed as defense, as the knowledge that prevents you from walking into traps. And I mean that sincerely. The purpose of understanding these patterns isn't to become the person who sets them for others. That path, if you actually follow Machiavelli all the way through, leads to isolation, constant vigilance, and the kind of exhausting life where you never fully trust anyone because you've made yourself into someone who can't be fully trusted. That's not a win. That's just a different kind of trap. The value here is entirely in the defensive application. When you understand trap 1, you're harder to charm into premature trust. When you understand trap 3, you're harder to manipulate through approval and withdrawal. When you understand trap 5, you're harder to get premature vulnerability from. You become, in the most genuine sense, a harder target for manipulation, for exploitation, for the relational and professional harm that comes from operating with blind spots. Use this knowledge as a lens, not a weapon. Use it to ask better questions. Use it to build more honest assessments of situations and people. Use it to catch yourself in your own patterns before they cost you. That's where the real value lives. Because here's what I genuinely believe about this material. The most powerful thing you can do with a map of human manipulation is make yourself impossible to manipulate. Not by becoming cold, not by becoming suspicious of everyone, not by turning your relationships into chess matches, but by developing the kind of clarity and security that doesn't need to be deceived. When you know your own values deeply enough that you don't need approval to feel secure, the people who weaponize approval lose their hold. When you read behavior rather than presentation, the people who weaponize charm lose their edge. When you're honest about your actual position, the people who exploit self-deception find nothing to work with. The Machiavelli who has been caricatured as a villain was actually offering something closer to a gift, an unflinching map of how humans actually work, in the hope that whoever read it could navigate the territory more safely, more clearly, and with fewer painful surprises. You've just received that map. Here's what I'd ask you to do with it. Pick one of these 7 traps, just one that you recognized most strongly in your own life. The one where you felt that uncomfortable flicker of recognition. The one where a real memory surfaced. Sit with it. Ask yourself honestly, where has this cost me? What would look different in my life if I stopped walking into it? That's not a comfortable question, but it might be the most valuable one you engage with this week. And the willingness to sit with that discomfort, to look at it rather than scroll past it, is itself the beginning of getting out of the trap. If this video gave you something real, drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious which trap hit closest to home for you and what you're going to do about it. And if someone in your life could use this perspective, a friend navigating a difficult situation, a colleague who keeps getting burned, someone who you can see walking straight into one of these patterns, share it with them. Not to call them out, just because sometimes the most useful thing you can do for someone you care about is hand them a mirror. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.